Okay, so part 2 of lecture 5. Okay, so the three-process model, that is Eichenbaum, and we're going to remember this as, it sounds like someone from World 2, so we're going to think of Eichenbaum, Hitler dropping 3 Eichenbaums on the Jews for the three-process model. Okay, and so, each of these three pathways has a purpose. First, the perennial cortex is the what pathway for objects, the parahippocampal cortex is the where pathway, and the hippocampus interacts with both of these to place items in context. Okay, and so you can think of the perennial cortex as the what and the parahippocampal cortex as the where. And you can think of this because the hippo never knows where his girlfriend is. And his girlfriend, as we have talked about many times, is the parahippocampal cortex. And he never knows where she is. And so she's the where pathway, parahippocampal cortex. And the perennial cortex, perennial cortex, what pathway? 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 Okay, so perennial cortex, what pathway? Perennial cortex, what pathway? I don't know if it's perennial. I think it's parietal. Parietal cortex, what pathway? And so parietal cortex, we're going to think of a little toy rhino, and that is like the what, part of the what pathway. And then again, like we already know the hippocampus, that's encoding relationships. But just the thing to know is that just imagine a little hippo underneath these 3 Eichenbaums, because we know that the hippocampus is going to encode both these things and encode relationships. That's pretty obvious at this point. Hippocampus encodes relationships and shit. Okay, so what where pathways are in the MTL, and then they converge at the hippocampus, it appears, because the parahippocampal cortex and the parietal cortex are both in the MTL. Okay, and so the hippocampus binds items and concepts, and so you can think of a hippo, which they're like very rich and wealthy, and you can now bind this hippo in an SMM little set thing. And so you can think of an object bound to its ass, and that object can be a dildo. And where is the dildo? You know where the dildo is. Okay, and so the hippocampus binds the what and where pathways, and that's part of the Eichenbaum three-process model. Okay, and so Da Vinci, that is another model, and so the Da Vinci model, that basically says that the parietal cortex encodes objects. We already had that, and then the parahippocampal cortex encodes spatial layout. And so like they're just saying that the parietal cortex goes first, says what, parahippocampal goes next, says where, and then their hippocampus integrates them into a domain general relational memory. And so just remember that for Da Vinci has the parietal go first and then the parahippocampal, and this integrates at the hippocampus. And remember this because Da Vinci sounds like Da Vinci, and he was a great painter. He painted everything. Da Vinci painted the whole world. And so basically this theory is saying that the hippocampus integrates both these into a domain general relational memory. And so you can kind of think of like Da Vinci painting like the ceiling of this big dome and integrating everything together. Okay. And so perennial encodes objects. Again, parietal encodes objects like that little rhino. Parahippocampal encodes the spatial layout, and the hippocampus is for context and binding. Okay, and so perennial what? Parahippocampal where? Hippocampus binding. And again, that is the Da Vinci model. And so it's kind of like the Eichenbaum model, except these are in a sequential order. Just like painting is sequential. Da Vinci was sequential in his painting. Like I'm sure he did layers, and that's how this model is also. Okay, and so you can think of this as the domain general relational memory. It's like 2 giant stores in the shape of a dome. And so it's like these 2 stores, and they're general stores. These like huge general stores with Da Vinci paintings on the ceiling, which is absurd. And they are dating. Like these 2 stores are dating. I know that doesn't make sense, but just remember it. Okay. And so domain general relational memory. And so moving on to a new topic. Most researchers believe that long-term coding occurs in the cortex. And so long-term coding occurs in the cortex. We already know that. Like the long-term stuff goes back into the neocortex, and it's coded there by the MTL probably, or the hippocampus. Yeah, it's encoded there probably by the hippocampus, and it's put into that cortex. We already know that. But the new concept here is that whatever was activated as you were encoding it is going to be reactivated when you retrieve it. So basically, like if you perceive someone throwing a ball and you watch the ball move through the air and land in your dad's baseball mitt. What is that thing called? Baseball glove. Okay, and so as you're watching that, your MT cortex for motion is being activated. And also your V4 for like the super bright color of the neon ball. Why are they doing the tennis ball? I don't know. But the V4 and the MT are activated. And so when you retrieve this memory, the V4 and the MT motion cortex are also going to be reactivated because what you activated when you encoded is also going to be reactivated when you retrieve. Okay, and you can, these retrievals reactivate it, and these retrievals could be cued by something as simple as language, or something, like someone could just mention that event. And another example of this, other than the ball falling into your dad's baseball mitt, is if you hear a linguistic stimuli, you're probably, when you retrieve that memory, like when you think about what that person was saying earlier, you're probably going to like think the sound of their voice, right? And like you're going to think of like what it was like to probably say those words. And so then your auditory and your motor cortex are going to be activated. I think it's particularly interesting that your motor cortex is going to be activated because it has to do with speech. So that's interesting. Okay, and so moving on to a new concept, same sensory reactivation in episodic. And so basically, like, we're saying that if you can look at the way something is encoded and what is firing as it's encoded, but then as you retrieve it. If you put someone in an fMRI, you can look at all these different voxel patterns in an fMRI, and you're going to be able to kind of match these voxel patterns to when the memory was encoded and when you think about that memory again. And these can like match up pretty well. And so there's going to be different patterns depending on whether it's a cat that you were looking at or a face or a landscape. And it's just going to be the same pattern as when it was activated. Okay. And so moving on to a whole new category. This is in big blue font. New category. Well, wait a minute. Okay, and so damage to the frontal lobe is going to result in subtle deficits in declarative memory. So if you damage the front part, and you can think of like the front as like the front of the ship, like that's where you're directing it, you have these like declarative memories, like these concrete things that you know, these episodes, these semantic ideas that get you through the world, and there's just going to be a few subtle deficits in the declarative memory. Just like if you get a hole in the front of the boat, like you're going to be okay, you're not going to go down, whereas like an MTL lesion is just like taking the whole bottom of the boat out, whereas that's not how it's like if you get damage to the frontal lobe. It's just going to be a little bit of deficits in the declarative memory. And this is effective mostly with context and where you heard the info, so like the source memory. And so basically this is mostly just going to be like, oh, where did you learn about glycolysis? And you won't be able to say, oh, by the third one, you'll be like, oh, I just kind of always knew it. Like, I don't remember where I learned that. And so that's probably going to be the result of a frontal lobe injury. It's kind of like the boat is just like a little off balance. Okay. All right. And so, yeah, if you have this like frontal lobe damage, you're more likely to say that you already knew a fact. And as opposed to like, oh yeah, I learned that fact in this test, blah, 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 blah. And so once again, damage to the frontal lobe is just going to have slight deficits in the declarative memory, which is semantic and episodic, whereas, so it's just like a little puncture in the front of the boat, whereas an MTL lesion is going to be like the whole bottom of the boat fell out, like you're fucked. Okay, and so moving on to new topic, in normal circumstances, encoding episodic and retrieval of semantic are probably going to go often hand in hand, because like you know that Subway is healthy and you know how to get there, which is like semantic, but then like an episodic memory is going to be encoded because you remember a specific episode at Subway that one time, and yeah, so like encoding episodic, you're going to encode that special episode, but you're also going to like know semantic information. So it's just, again, saying that like this semantic information and this episodic information, it's kind of seeming like one and the same, sort of. Okay, and so encoding episodic and retrieval semantic, those are going to lead to the subsequent memory paradigm studies. And what the subsequent memory paradigm studies are is where you learn word lists in fMRI, and then after you have a recognition test. Okay, and basically what you gain from this is that the frontal lobe needs to be active in order to remember these words that you learned. And so from the subsequent memory paradigm study, you have just learned that you need the frontal lobe in order to remember these word lists. Okay, so again, subsequent memory paradigm study shows us that you need the frontal lobe in order to remember these word lists and like recognize them. Okay. So that part's a little tricky, so I don't know if I go back and listen to that. I'll just read it one more time. Subsequent memory paradigm studies learn word lists in fMRI, and then after you have a recognition test, and what you glean from this is that the frontal lobe needs to be active in order to remember stuff. Okay. Yeah, so basically, like, if your frontal lobe doesn't glow on this fMRI, like, you're not going to remember it. Like, if I tell you a piece of information and you're in fMRI and, like, I'm lecturing to you, I can tell if you're going to encode that information, because in the fMRI scan, depending on what I say, if your frontal cortex lights up, that means that it's encoding, whereas if it does not, then it is not encoding. Okay, and moving on to a new topic, difference in memory effect. And so what you do with this is you look at ERPs, which are event-related potentials, and this is super related to what we just talked about in the subsequent memory paradigm studies. And so you look at ERPs, and it shows that after 300 to 800 milliseconds, you can see the potential if it's encoded or not. So that's going to be like, is the frontal lit up or not? Like, you can see that within 300 to 800 milliseconds, so pretty quick, I'm going to be able to tell. Okay, and so another thing, regions important for encoding center on the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, specifically the left inferior frontal gyrus. And so, once again, regions important for encoding information center on the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. So that's like the VLPC. VLPC. I'm trying to think of an acronym for that. Okay, ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is important for coding, specifically the left interior frontal gyrus. Okay, ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is important for encoding. So prefrontal cortex, of course, that's going to be important for encoding because it's kind of like the neocortex. Like, you need the cortex to encode stuff. And specifically the left interior frontal gyrus. And so you can kind of think as like, picture the memory swirling down into a deep, dark gyrus on like the left of your brain. And so it's a ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, and a part of it is the left inferior frontal gyrus. And so that's like a left little gyrus swirling down, taking all the information with it. Okay. So now we're going to look at episodic memory retrieval. And so the first thing that you do to retrieve an episodic memory is there's going to be a queue. So it's going to be called the retrieval queue. And then second, you're going to do a memory search, which requires internal attention. Then you're going to recover the memory. And then 4 is the most important part, which is monitoring. And so basically what that's going to be is you check if it matches what you wanted, and you're going to reject something if it's irrelevant. But yeah, so monitoring is like, oh, does this match up? Like, yes, no, okay. All right, and so then this episodic memory retrieval might be associated with a distinct mental state or mode. So like maybe if you're in a bad mood, you're always going to remember how your dad used to yell at you or something. Like, and that's an episodic memory that's kind of related to a certain mood. And so these episodic memory retrievals can be related to moods. Okay, and so summary, successful episodic encoding is the left IGF. Left IGF, oh, that's much better. Okay, so encoding we're going to think of it as a left IGF because, again, it's a left gyrus thing. But also, there's an organization I do called IFC, which is like the entrepreneurship thing, and a lot of the kids in their code, like Oscar, and basically they are going to be able to encode things, and it's going to be successful. Like their little IFC thing is going to be successful, and so successful episodic encoding is in the left IFG, and that's like the left little gyrus that all the memories swirl around and down, down, down into. And you can also think about this as encoding is equal to the left IGF because it's like in goes the food, because encoding is kind of like digesting. Okay, and so then moving over to episodic retrieval. And so we just went over encoding, which is in the left IGF, and now we're going to retrieval. And so retrieval has to do mostly with the superior dorsal left frontal regions. And so how do you think about this? The retrieval of episodic memory has to do with superior dorsal left frontal regions. So that'd be LFR. So that's kind of like left for right. Okay, yeah, I have something close. Okay, and so episodic retrieval, that's another word for this area is the middle front gyrus. And so you can kind of think of like a gyrus in the middle of your head towards the front, which is, and like the first one was black, this is going down, this one's like white. It's like colorful, it's spitting out all this episodic memory, and it's like in the front, whereas the down one is in the left, because like you, I don't know, like you want to just digest stuff quietly, whereas like when you're retrieving it, you want it to be really loud in the middle and the front. Okay, and so regions, okay, and so episodic retrieval is going to be that middle front gyrus, which is also the left frontal region. So I guess encoding and retrieval are both kind of in the left. And so episodic retrieval is going to be middle frontal gyrus plus the regions in the posterior parietal cortex. Okay, and so to retrieve, you can just think about this little trick. The left frontal is where my rook piercing is, and then coming up from the gyrus in the front, in the middle of the head. So again, that's like where all the episodes come out. And then plus back to parietal. Okay, and so then after you look at my rook piercing, you should immediately think about shooting the parrot in the back of the head, because also the parietal cortex, the back of the parietal cortex specifically, is going to help you with pulling out these memories. And so maybe you are really scared of birds and you want to know what to do in a situation with a bird, and so you pull up that episodic memory and you immediately think of, well, my rook, which correlates to the left frontal gyrus, because that can kind of help. It's like a left frontal mid gyrus. And then you think about how the back of my rook, and then you think of shooting parrot in the back of the head, because also in reference to this gyrus, it is the parietal, the back part of the parietal that helps you with retrieving memories. And so just to say it again, rook plus front middle gyrus plus back of parrot's head being shot, and that's how you remember that. Okay, so on to a new topic in the next video.